this point, when we get to this point, it's not necessarily that we're that our hearing, because of our hearing, we just nod our head more often.
There
We
you
don't know
go.
what we're nodding to, but oh yeah, okay, okay,
My wife would agree with you 100%, man.
yep,
Well,
that's
for the folks out there, make it official. I'm here with Grayling Achiu, class of 75 Kamehameha. Me and him had same homeroom or next door homeroom, seventh grade, IBS, and what was the lady's name? I cannot remember. Science teachers, yeah.
rap. Was it rap? Don't remember.
Yeah. Smith was on one side, and right next door was the Wahine. I don't even remember how they referred to us by letters, maybe or something. Too far back.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to you today from where? East Coast, someplace, huh?
No, I live right outside of D.C. in Fairfax County in Virginia. But today I'm in Salt Lake City visiting a couple of the kids. Easter break, that kind of thing.
All right. Did you fly or drive?
Oh, we drive. My wife's going to be here for a couple of months with the kids. Uh, so, needs a car, all of that stuff.
So what year did you start Kamehameha, Gray?
In kindergarten,
Oh, my first
62?
lifer. My first lifer.
Yeah, I think in 62 it was. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So wow, you had a lot of Kamehameha.
And you know what? I never appreciated it until much, much later. You know,
I'm the same exact way. I look back and man, I should have done that back then because I would need it right now.
oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, shucks.
I took my kids a couple years ago. They wanted to see, Honolulu from my perspective, not the tourist perspective. And so, one of the things they wanted to do was go up to Kamehameha. So we did. And they were just awestruck. They said, Dad, we've never seen anything, any high school like this. It's better than many colleges,
Oh, definitely.
right?
Yeah.
And they said, we don't know of any place that has a view like this. You could just sit here and just be enthralled with the view of Honolulu and the harbor and the airport, all of that.
Oh, yeah, because I think I'm beyond the statute of limitations, so I can admit it
Mm.
now. As a boarder, we used to climb out the window and sit on that ledge,
Yeah.
2, 3 in the morning and just kind of ooh and ah for an hour.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we graduate high school. Where do you go first, Gray?
I went to Manoa for a year. And then after that, I went on a Mormon mission to Hong Kong for 2 years.
How was that?
It was a good place for me. I'm part Chinese, love the Chinese people there. I mean, you're eating Chinese food every day. Gee whiz. That's great. Um,
Surprisingly, I saw some little history bit yesterday about pancit,
yeah.
and that has Chinese origin.
Well, if
You
you
know,
talk to the old school Chinese guys, they'll tell you everyone descends from them. And the Chinese word for China is Zhonggok, and it means Middle Kingdom. So God speaks to mankind through China because China's the Middle Kingdom, and everybody else is beneath them.
wow.
Yeah.
So did you pick up any language in your mission?
Yes, we learned to speak Cantonese.
Wow,
The
that's the
way the
harder
Mormon
one,
Church.
from what I understand.
It can be, yeah. One of the things that the Mormon Church does is that they have a language school at BYU here in Provo, and you go there for 2 months, and you get a glimpse of the language. And over a period of time in Hong Kong, you become more and more fluent. And I think that's the way it is for a lot of, regardless of where you go, that you pick it up because you have to.
I was talking to someone one Chinese person who spoke Mandarin, and I said, I think the majority of Chinese in Hawaii are Cantonese.
Yes.
I said, because you go eat and it'll sound like people are tearing each other apart back in the kitchen. And he goes, yeah, it just has that angry intonation to it. And I went, man, it just sounds horrible sometimes,
Yeah.
man. And they're probably just, you know, conversing.
Yeah. It was a good experience, no question. Learned a lot.
Were you able to kind of function because of the language or a lot of English available?
Well, you needed to speak Cantonese and eventually you became fluent. Uh, you just had
And
to. And you pick things up. And I'll tell you, one of the most important things that you learn is that God blesses you. Uh, that if you do your best and you beg Him to tune up your ear, that you figure it out, you know?
huh,
Yeah.
neat. So you finish your mission and then what?
I went to BYU in Utah, in Provo, spent a couple years there, studied poli-sci and methods and analytics, that kind of thing. While I was there, I was really fortunate uh, to meet a couple of professors who took care of me. One of them was a Fulbright professor, and he was working in 1980. He was working as a consultant to the Reagan campaign. Um, and so he, I tagged along with him back to DC for the general campaign, learned a lot. Um, and after we won, he asked if I wanted to stay, so I stayed. Worked as the most junior guy there in the White House. Got coffee and donuts and all of the grunt stuff that you do. The benefit was that I got to sit in these meetings, take notes, and just listen. And then on the way back, I'd ask him to explain whatever the topic was. So you had this inside view that you couldn't get anywhere else. And I
Did
was
you get to meet any renowned politicians?
a lot, a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. I'll tell you, everybody goes to take from staff. Everybody goes to take a picture with the president in the Oval Office. And so our group went, and we're supposed to be there 5 minutes. We were there for an hour, and he's leaning against his desk and he's telling us stories, for an
Wow.
hour. And the thing that was interesting to me was up to that point, I didn't want to be political because I thought of myself as an analyst, data, algorithms, all of that stuff. And I didn't want any of that to color my perception. Well, after that hour, I mean, we're walking back, and my boss asked me, goes, "So what do you think?" I said, "I'd do anything for him." His charisma was so overwhelming. Um, and he was so nice. And you wanted to be with him. You wanted to do whatever he wanted. And I thought it was such an interesting thing because I thought of myself as this analyst, not swayed by political things, just looking at data. And in 1 hour, it completely flipped. So either I was extraordinarily weak or he was that charismatic and you wanted to follow close.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a great experience.
So how long were you in that arena?
I did political stuff for about 10, 12 years, uh,
Okay.
mostly campaigns, presidential campaigns, Senate campaigns. Uh, Campaigns is where the fun is. Governing is hard work. So if you get a chance to do a political campaign, big fun because it ends. Governing, you get beat up all the time.
Uh, well, I want to be, as we're talking, I want to be running a side timeline with this. So
Yeah.
when did you get married?
Um, I got married in 1982, July
Okay.
13th,
So
1982.
during this same time
Yes.
period then.
Yes, my wife was working up on Capitol Hill, a junior person like I was, for Senator Hatch from Utah. We met each other at church. She thought I needed to repent, all that stuff. We got married. We have 4 children today, 5 grandchildren.
Wow.
Yeah.
Your kids then raised as far as education and everything in DC.
Yes, in Fairfax. Yeah.
Okay. So nobody got to the point where they said, Dad, I want to go to the same school as you.
I don't think their mom would allow that conversation to happen.
Oh, okay.
She wanted them home every day, and I
Gotcha.
get it. Yeah.
Makes absolute sense. So when you leave the political arena, where do you go next?
I started doing consulting. Specifically, I was doing a lot of data and algorithms, that kind of thing. So I continue to do that, and that's what I've been doing for the past 30 years. Um,
And does it necessarily have to maintain a political flavor to it, or
I'll tell you, the political stuff is. Let me rephrase. The political awareness is important. I'll give you an example. You remember John White in elementary? You probably, yeah, you came in what, seventh grade, right? So Mr. White taught in elementary school. I had him in
I do?
fourth and
Okay,
sixth
yeah.
grade. You know him? Okay, so one of the things that he told us, I think it was in the sixth grade, is he said, I think you should read these columns, these political columnists. And I said, okay. And so I read, there were 2 of them, one from San Francisco, one from Chicago. Um, so until the guy died, I read his column from sixth grade until he died, like 1997, 98, around there. This guy's name's Mike Royko. And he wrote about Chicago politics. So, you have this different view of politics. But Chicago's where the big boys are. And
Hmm, yeah.
so I knew a lot just from reading his columns over, however many decades. Um, we were bidding on a contract 2010 at the Federal Communications Commission to redo their web presence, to redo a lot of their internal systems. And we go for the interview, and half of the guys on the committee are political guys from Obama's campaign. And I don't know, I can't remember exactly how it happened. We started talking politics, Chicago politics. These guys are young, 29, 30 years old, early 30s. And so we started talking, and the guy goes, how do you know these things? He said, I read Royko for 30 years. And they're like, are you kidding me? I said, absolutely not. And so we talked, instead of talking about the project, we talked about Chicago politics. We wrapped up. My boss was livid on the way back to the car. He goes, you just blew it. And I thought, that's okay. I'll get another job. We go back to the office, and as we walk in the door, his executive assistant and the president of the company they're just smiling. And he says, what's up? And he goes, they called. You guys got the contract. It wasn't that big. It's like $10 million or something. And then they said, but Gray needs to be the lead on the project. That's the deal.
Wow.
So I always think back how important it was that I had John White as a teacher. He gave me this heads up, and there was no direct benefit until, I don't know, 40 years later. but I appreciate that, you know. So
That's
being
awesome.
politically aware is important in this town. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, small tangent, because as I listen to you speak, you're well acclimated into living in the DC world. Your wife
Yeah.
is a Utah girl?
Yes.
Okay. My wife's a Minnesota girl. How far into the relationship was it before she heard you speak pidgin?
Oh, pretty quick.
Oh, okay.
Pretty quick.
We had
Yeah.
been going together 9, 10 months and not a lick. Then one day, a friend from Waimanalo calls me on the phone, and we talked for an hour. And when we got done with the phone call, my wife was just like, "Who are you?" So, okay. And then also, I get curious about it too when you have a Hawaiian married to a non-local. Is she an adventurous eater?
You know, that was one of the things that just that made the case to me. Because when we were dating, you know, I was at the bottom of the barrel, didn't have a whole lot of money in DC. So we'd go to the cheapest Chinese dives or to the cheapest Argentinian dives. And, you know, she was the her rule was you got to take 3 bites. And I thought, great. Of course, I was more hesitant about some of the food that they ate. You know, I really didn't grow up with cheese. You know,
Yeah.
our bread at home was wholesome bread or loves. I didn't realize that they had all these other kinds of breads that were, you know, brown and crusty. And but over the years, I've grown to become a pseudo fan of different kinds of breads and cheeses and all of that.
I like a lot of the breads, but I don't like the ones that have seeds in them. I don't
Yeah.
like to sit there and except for toast, I don't like a lot of crunching going on when I eat bread.
Yep.
So I would imagine you and your family have at least visited Hawaii.
Several times,
Okay.
multiple times. Yeah.
Do you still have a lot of family back in Hawaii?
And that's part of the reason of going back. My mom's family, a lot of them are on the west side of Kauai, Waimea, Kekaha, Mana, all of that side,
Oh,
Hanapepe. Yeah. So we usually go out every, I don't know, 5, 7 years for family reunions. Um, and it's a great experience for the kids because honestly, living in Fairfax County, they're pretty spoiled. They don't think they're spoiled, but they're spoiled. And
uh,
you go from this big city, all kinds of shopping and entitlement. You know, you go to Kikaha and, you know, it's a plantation town.
but you know, Kauai is my favorite island.
Yeah. Me too.
In,
Me
in
too.
fact, now, are you going to make our 50th reunion?
Well, it'll depend. We have a contract in Indonesia with uh, with the government, and part of it is funded by the U.S. government, and so we're waiting for them to unfreeze it. And what I was hoping to do is on a trip to Indonesia, stop by for the reunion, but we'll see. We'll
Okay.
see.
Are you still working full time then?
Yeah, this is you know, it kind of bothered me that it took so long to find stuff that is just big fun and pays reasonably well. So I love this work. I last summer I spent a month in Indonesia and working with the local guys was great. And one of the things that happened was one of their senior guys says, "Hey, I hear you're Hawaiian." I said, "Yeah." Comes up to me, gives me a big hug, and he goes, "You know, we're cousins." I said, "Yeah, we are, right? Hawaiian style there, we're all cousins." And he says, "No." He says, "The people who populated Polynesia came from the Malay Peninsula. Indonesia, Malaysia, uh, that whole area. And I said, that's what I've heard. And he goes, yeah. He goes, do more reading. And that's correct, right? They talk about two exit points into Polynesia. Folks came from the Malay Peninsula and from Taiwan. Uh, and, we developed our own culture and that kind of thing, but that's where we came from. And one night I'm watching TV in my room, and they had a cultural thing, and I looked at it and I thought, from one of the Indonesian islands, and I looked at it and I thought, these are the guys who went to Fiji because they dressed like them, uh, their ceremonies were like them, their dance was like them, and I thought, oh yeah, these are all our cousins, you know. So the great explorers are Polynesian, but we have Malay roots. So it's kind of an interesting
Wow.
thing. Yeah.
In my life, once on one of my either Hawaii mainland or mainland Hawaii flights, I sat next to a guy who taught Portuguese at UH.
Yeah.
And he had gone to Brazil to live there for a year, immerse himself in the
Hmm.
Portuguese language. And he told me a wild story. He and the Brazilian guy who teaches Portuguese are walking down the beach. They're conversing in Portuguese because that's why he's there. And then the Brazilian professor looks down at some seaweed and uses a supposedly Brazilian word. He calls it limu. And the UH guy is like, excuse me. And they talk. And so, I mean, I don't know what's true or what's projected, but they claim, South America was maybe a stopping point as they traveled. So I thought, well, that was pretty spooky.
Well, so much of our history and our perceptions and research, they're all European based. It's through the European lens, right? And so if it doesn't happen through the European lens, then it's all kind of. But over the years, the more research we're doing, we have a better view of all of these different cultures. And I think we're learning more and more about how magnificent our ancestors were.
Oh, I mean, to even embark on any of the shorter, I mean, who in their right mind would set off in a canoe with no target to begin with?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. What would be the drive to go, hey, let's go look for something,
Yep.
it just blows my mind.
Yep. I completely agree.
Hmm. So what do you do for recreation?
We go hunting, go shooting. Um, what else do we do? We go fishing. Uh, I was
Is
in
your
North
hunting
Carolina.
smaller game or larger game when you hunt?
It depends where we are. Uh, Back east, it's primarily deer. There's huge amounts of deer. And then back here in Utah, it's we've gone elk hunting. Never got any,
Wow.
but I have one son. I tell my son, we go hunting not because we need the meat. Some people need to hunt to feed their families. I said we go hunting because it's a time for the guys to get together and to just talk about stuff. And I said my favorite times of my favorite hunting was not so much that we got uh, anything, but that you were with the uncles on Kauai and they're telling you stuff and you're like, I never heard that story. Don't tell anybody. Your auntie would get upset. All of these family stories, and I think they were so important because it told us it tells you about them, their experiences. I had uncles, like all we all do. We've all had uncles and granduncles who fought in World War II, and they'll tell you but kind of not tell you. And you pick up this and that from them, and they have a greater appreciation of life when they've had several of their best friends get killed. They realize how much more they have to take care of each other. And so, you learn a lot. And to me, that's the whole point, whether it's hunting or fishing, whatever, to share those experiences in a different setting, less
and
formal setting.
and and way back when oral history was the only thing that
Yeah,
existed, Thomas Chun and I did one of these the other day, and he and I were talking about how I kind of am sad that when I was a little kid, I'd hear lots of these stories and just marvel in them. But when I got old enough to where I thought about and never took step, but thought about trying to document some of that history, a lot of them were gone already,
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
That was
mean,
one of
just
the things I
take
I, I
advantage.
did. Um, I probably have 50 hours of video uh, with the grandparents, the uncles, you know,
That's
um,
awesome.
and you go back and you watch them and you think, wow, you guys put together a good base for us, and we never appreciated it. We just thought food appeared on the table no matter what. We thought gas was in the gas tank no matter what, and clothes just appeared. All of those things. And now, as parents and grandparents, we know that the work is hard. But I think we're extremely blessed to have that.
I mentor with a nonprofit here in town, and the organization developed a high school program where they go into the high school. The kids are randomly issued an annual income,
Right.
and then there are stations throughout the room where they got to secure insurance, lodging, transportation, and what you're saying reminded me because some of the kids will uh I've sat at a public transportation station. They go right to the car dealer first.
Yeah.
And then as they crunch numbers, ooh, whoa, because they even issue kids. You have 5 kids. So, a lot of them kind of sheepishly truck back to the public transportation and pick up information because it's like, holy moly, how did mom and dad do it,
Yeah.
with these kinds of numbers? That's a reality check, boy. And it's really educational for them.
No question. And I think that's a hard thing to teach because, on one hand, honestly, we want to spoil our kids. We want to give them stuff that, we never had. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. When my oldest daughter she and her husband wanted to buy a house. So she asked me, she goes, Dad, how did you get the down payment? I said, the 7-Eleven model. And she goes, well, what is that? I said, well, I worked from 7 to 5 at, downtown. And then I got on the metro. And from 6 to 11, I worked a second job doing political stuff. And she goes, oh, and I said, and your mom made sandwiches for me to eat on the metro. So when I got there at 6, and I said, that's how we saved the money. She goes, yeah, that's a lot of work. I said, yeah, that's just the way it is.
Hello.
Yeah, right. But that was a hard lesson for us to learn. So, you know,
Yeah, from the various Zooms I've done so far, people have taken a lot of directions, and I hear as they've learned some life lessons along the way. What what career fields of your kids that are working have they chosen?
my oldest works for Wells Fargo, the bank, doing communications and PR. My second daughter is a special needs teacher here in Salt Lake.
Wow, okay.
My son is an attorney. He's the general counsel of about 500-man company in Las Vegas. And my youngest is staying at home with her newborn. Well, it's not, he's not a newborn anymore. He's what, 10 months old. And when things are right, she'll go back to school. She's finished her undergraduate. She's you know, at some point go to grad school.
Good, good. Sounds like they're all doing real well.
Well, reasonably, I told the kids, if you listen to everybody, you'll just be incredibly confused. I said, find something you love because then it'll be fun. And the kids are laughing. They said, Dad, you love politics? I said, yeah. And they said, you've got walls of books, of political books. I said, yeah, reading them is a fun thing for me. It helps me understand just a little bit better. And I said, and then somebody's foolish enough to pay me money to do something I love. And I said, find the same thing for you. You may have to try a couple of things, but do your best. You'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
I got the same type of message that I want to give to my grandkids because I didn't graduate college. I went to 2.5 years and then just I wasn't learning that way. So went to work and everything was on the job training for me. And I love it. I like that it happened that way. So, whenever my kids give the grandkids that got to do college speech, I pull them aside and kind of, you need to hear the other side. My oldest granddaughter's 23. She's a welder, making pretty darn good money for a 23 year
Oh,
old.
absolutely. Yeah.
So,
I
they
think
need to
we
look at
forget.
their options.
Yeah, I think we forget how dependent we are. In my family, everyone knows do not let dad get anywhere near the electrical panel or fixing anything because to repair the additional damage is really expensive. And so, getting an electrician to come in and do something, they're not cheap. Getting the guy to come in and tune up your AC or your heater, that's expensive. And plumbing, I mean, that's crazy. So taking your car to the mechanic, you know, all of that. I mean, and those guys make good money. Nothing to be ashamed about. You don't have to go out and get half a dozen suits and polish your shoes. I mean, people
Yeah,
forget that there's this whole group of careers that can provide for your family and take care of things.
absolutely. And then one part of that I thought of and had not thought of before is the fact that if I think about my time, yes, I can probably get out there and change the oil cheaper, but then that's half hour, 45 minutes. I couldn't be doing something else,
Yeah,
So if I can go out in that 45 minutes and make $125 and spend 60 of it changing the oil or whatever, that's a plus,
yeah,
as opposed to me putting in my time and effort and spending $60 plus my time, you know. So yeah, lots of different perspectives.
absolutely.
Yeah. How many of our reunions have you been to?
A couple, and I don't even remember. Uh, a couple, and the funny thing is, I've enjoyed all of them. I enjoy being there. I enjoy, seeing folks you haven't seen for forever. Um, and I think this interviews that you're doing, I think this is a great idea.
Thank you.
You know, keeping up, keeping up with what people are doing, and being happy for their lives, happy for their successes, happy for their ability to get out from under some kind of garbage thing that happens, you know. I think that's a big deal. And with so much social media kind of thing where with influencers and stuff, we're trying to prove that we're better. I don't know what that means, but that you're better because you're in, the Maldives or wherever. Um, that's not that's not real. The real thing is, learning about each other and saying, "Wow, he busted his chops to get this done." She's done the same thing. Uh, and we know that her plate is overly full, but yet she figures things out. I think those things are really important lessons. They give you hope that we can succeed and continue to succeed.
Because a couple of the motivators when I had the project enter my brain was first off, I had heard of some people that definitely were not going to be able to make the reunion because of life getting in the way. So I thought, at least this way, they get to still, because, you walk up to the first person at the reunion, you're going to go, what you been doing?
Exactly.
Where are you at? So I thought, well, they can still give that information. They can still get that information. And just kind of randomly, as people are deciding to help me with it, you know, even if you went to the reunion guaranteed, not everybody's going to be able to sit with you in the
Yeah.
time that we have
Yeah.
and learn about Royco's column,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. So, when was the last time you were back in Hawaii?
2 summers ago,
Okay.
my oldest grandson went to. I know they have a new name for it, but explorations.
Okay.
And if you look at my grandson, you talk about somebody who's howly, blue eyes, blonde hair, pale skin. Um, and he was a little worried. He goes, "But Grandpa, I'm not like brown and stuff." I said, "Hawaiian's in your heart." I said, "Just remember that Hawaiian's in your heart, and your heart drives how you behave, how you react, all of that stuff."
Yeah.
And I thought it was a good experience for him.
Did he enjoy
Explore.
it?
Oh, he did. He loved it. And explorations now is, they're not boarding. Uh, so you drop them off in the morning, pick them up, at the terminal
Oh,
in the
okay.
afternoon, and we're driving around, and he's saying Hawaiian street names to me. And I'm like, "How do you know that?" "Oh, we had a class. The guy was telling us how to pronounce it in Hawaiian and all of this." And I'm thinking, so glad I brought him, you know, so glad.
Puts him ahead of the game. And you're absolutely right as far as the physical appearance. I spoke with, do you remember Raymond Fujikawa?
Yeah,
Okay. Did one of these with him, and he has 5 kids. Three of them, he said, looked like they could have been born and raised in Papakolea or wherever.
right.
And then he has two that look more howly than he does, so but through exposure, I mean, they all, you know, have interacted with cousins and family back in Hawaii. They can, if not speak, at least understand pidgin.
Yeah,
Because that's one of those use it or lose it things, I believe. But so yeah, and the fact that he liked it is a good thing, I think.
yeah.
Now I don't know if I'm jaded because I was a boarder, but I think there's a certain facet and benefit to having stayed in the dorms
No
during
question.
explorations.
No question. But with the pandemic and all of that, I understand. Nonetheless, I'm still grateful that they do this. One of the things that irritates my wife is that she'll say something and she'll expect an answer in English. And my response to that is, right? Mm. My grandson started doing that. He got into big trouble because, my wife said, you need to learn how to speak properly and cogently and, all of this stuff. And he sat there and listened to her. And then he said, mm. He doesn't do that anymore.
How old is your grandson?
He's 13.
Okay. How many grandchildren do you have?
I have five, 13, 8, 6, 4, and 1.
Good job, Grandpa, with the ages.
My goal is to be grandpa forever. So as long as they keep having them, I'll be grandpa. Yep.
Yeah, they're truly a blessing. I have nine, and then I don't even begin to imagine. I think Ray has 23, and
Wow.
Richard Bartlett has some other double digit number. It's like, oh, that's a lot of time to invest for it. But yeah, they're a blessing, you know. Uh, and I've heard it joked about, but I find that it's true. It's because you don't have to be responsible for the ramifications when you spoil them. You just spoil them and then send them home, you know.
Well, we do things a little different today. Um, I was the oldest of 6 kids.
Wow.
My mom was the only child for my grandparents. And so, old Hawaiian style, my grandmother asked my mom to raise me. And um, my mom said, yeah, she did. So I was the oldest. My number two sister, and I were raised by my grandparents. Um, and if somebody were to say, well, what are the key things that occurred in your life? That was it. That was one of them. I think it's because grandparents, they have, uh, what is the word? They have years, decades of experience. Um, they're not struggling to make their mark in the world. And, I was the fortunate beneficiary of that. Saturday mornings, we just go do stuff. And everything was an adventure. Uh, Going to Chinatown to getting whatever. Going to a Cocoa Head Range to go shooting for Saturday afternoon. Uh, Go fishing. Uh, but all of these things, they were adventures, and I think that comes from grandparents. And I remember one time Kalani Akana was up here, and we were talking, and he said, and I explained to him that, and he said, "Oh yeah, grandparents are there to pass along their wisdom, and you're there to take care of them." I don't know how well I took care of my grandparents, but they passed along a lot of wisdom. My grandfather used to tell me all the time, he says, listen the first time. And, I could never figure out what that means. And then it finally clicked that I needed to focus and be aware and all of that stuff instead of, you know, all over the place.
Kathy
Yeah.
Enos Thurston had similar advice from her grandparents and her dad too.
Yeah.
Two things she said, very important. Wake up early, pay attention.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought,
And so,
valuable lessons right there. So
yeah,
now what area of Oahu did you grow up in?
most of my growing up was down the street from the terminal, about 3 blocks. Our house, my grandparents, they lived right there by Bishop Museum. And in fact, the house is gone now because, gee, I don't know, 25 years ago or so, Bishop Museum wanted the land. And so they bought out probably about a dozen families and took, knocked down the house and paid for it, all that stuff. But yeah, and so it was Kalihi, and it was a good place to grow up. I know there are all of these stories about Mayor Wright and KPT and stuff. No question, they were rough. Uh, but growing up in Kalihi, you learned a lot of stuff.
Give you that valuable street smart exposure.
Well, and it was a lot of the old school stuff. One day we were out in the playing around and we saw this helicopter over Cam Shopping Center. Okay. And a helicopter police copter was there. About 30 minutes later, we see this police car coming down our street, turning down to this house, and there were our cousins. And so, being Niele, we just go take a look and see what's up. And I see my cousin getting out of the car, out of the police car, and this police officer is holding him. And I look at the police officer and I think, man, that's somebody, that's our cousin too. And I hear my cousin who was arrested saying, just take me to jail. If I go in the house and you tell him that I got arrested, my dad, he can beat the hell out of me. He can give me dirty leakings, da da da, all of this stuff. And that's what happened. So, he didn't need to go to jail to have a record, but the family took care of things. Whether or not that's acceptable today, I don't know, but it was then. And so, you learn stuff like that, like stay away from that kind of nonsense.
The advantage of third party lessons.
Oh yeah. And I used to go to church a couple blocks away, and a lot of the guys I went to church with went to Farrington. And so that was a good experience because, they always used to razz me. Uh, the pretty boys going to Kamehameha. They have to wear that army uniform and, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Huh.
you learn how to deal with that. And all of those guys were good friends to me. Can't complain. They were good friends.
Uh, when you attended BYU,
Yeah.
were any of our classmates there at the same time?
Not that I remember. I'm sure they were. I just don't remember any. Yeah. Um, yeah.
Do you keep in recent constant contact with any of our classmates?
Well, Devlin was one of my best friends. He is one of my best friends from seventh grade. And so we keep in touch. Same thing with Brock. Um, but yeah, after all of these years, he's still, and I think that's a hallmark of our class is that, you know, there's still a lot of activities for those who live at home to get together and to do things together. I think that's a big positive.
Yeah. So are you currently in touch with Brock?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
I'd
supposed to
like to,
meet in Las Vegas one of these days.
okay. Well, I'd like to ask if, you're able to at all maybe help put me in touch with him.
Okay,
He's one that's crossed my mind over here, and I don't know if I've ever seen him at a reunion. Of course, I've only been at three, so
he doesn't like that. It's he's got stuff going on, which is okay. I get it. Uh, but usually, if we're there, we'll get together. Um, so, how do you say the word? Oh, he's selective. Yeah, that's the word. Selective.
gotcha. And that's fine. Just,
Yeah.
do you know what career field he was involved in?
Oh yeah. Um, this is how things are done, right? So when I got off my Mormon mission, I lived in Honolulu for a couple of months to my grandparents. I needed to find work. I saw an ad in the newspaper for somebody to park cars at the Hyatt down in Waikiki. I show up, give them what we call today a resume. I mean, really? And the guy doesn't even look at it. He looks at me and he goes, "Hey, you Billy's boy?" "Yes." "Okay, start tonight. Your dad used to be my company commander at St. Louis." I said, "Oh, great." And then he looks at me and goes, "Don't embarrass your family." And I said, "Why would you say that?" And he goes, "Because you went to Kamehameha. It's not like St. Louis." I mean, this whole just playing with your head. And I worked there for a couple of months. Then I left to go to BYU. And I told Archie, I said, "Hey, I got a friend. He'd be perfect for this." And it was Brock. And so Brock's been working there since 1979
At the
at the
hotel.
Hyatt. He's a head bellman. Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Amazing. And longevity. I mean, it's rare to find a person who's had pretty much one job, you know.
yeah. Well, he moved up the stack and now I'm certain he's making pretty good money. Um, yeah, proud of him.
Good, good, good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to hope that your Indonesia trip will jive calendar wise.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
But if not, this session has been amazing. I mean, it's been so good to hear where you've gone and what you've done and about your family. It's just neat to hear.
Well, thank you. I
Lots of
appreciate
positive.
you. I appreciate this much a lot. Thank you.
You bet. Well, best to you and fingers crossed we'll see you in June.
Same here. Take care.
Yeah, aloha.
Aloha.